Hello there. Today I am so excited to share with you an interview with an adoptee named Patti Eddington, who wrote an amazing memoir called The Girl with Three Birthdays. And this memoir documents her life story and the journey that she took as an adult to figure out who her birth family truly was. I had an absolutely wonderful conversation with her, and I'm so excited to share it with you today. And if you're new here, my name is Katie, and I am a foster adoptive mom of three kids ages 6 through almost 14 now, which is blowing my mind. And here on my channel, I share a lot of adoption and foster care tips, but it's really been on my heart to share more adoptee stories. And so I'm so grateful that Patti and her team reached out to me and sent me this book so that we could have an opportunity to talk to her. Okay, well, today we have Patti Eddington here, and she is the author of The Girl with the Three Birthdays, and we're super excited to have her on the channel. She's an adoptee, and she's going to share a little bit about her story and her memoir. I have a copy of it right here. So first, I just want to have Patti just tell us a little bit about yourself and just the concept of your memoir.
You bet. Well, thank you first for having me. I really appreciate
Yeah.
it. I am an adopted person. I always knew there was never a time I remember being told. It was just part of who I was. And I didn't have many questions. I had a wonderful adoptive family. I was an only child. Um, and I guess as I got older, there may have been a few things that creep in. It's in the book that I began to think, wait a minute, something doesn't seem quite right. But I pushed all those down because I never wanted to hurt my parents. I got a sense that asking questions was maybe something that would hurt them and they would think they weren't enough. And then when my daughter was getting married in 2017, and both my parents had passed away by this time, she was having a lot of health issues and she gave me a DNA test. And I did the test and I got in touch with some biological relatives, which was kind of a big surprise. I guess I never thought it would happen.
Yeah,
Um,
especially after all that
it
time,
was
you know? Yeah.
right. I was in my late 50s by that time. And they told me stories that I could no longer think that everything had gone the way I'd been told it
Mhm.
had gone when I was little. And I might have been the cutest baby in the Cabbage Patch, but there was more to it than that. And
Yeah.
I don't know if they still use that analogy, but when I was growing up, that's we're
Yeah.
Cabbage Patch babies. And so I met them. They told me some secrets that shocked me, and that led me to have my adoption records unsealed. And when I was young and in Michigan, all adoptions, I think, were closed.
Yeah.
I researched my rights and I went to the courthouse and they sent me my records, and that led me to write the book.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, what a journey. And I think it's so interesting that it was all spurred on by your daughter just giving you this DNA test. And I think we're going to hear more and more stories like that coming out over
Oh,
the years because it just wasn't something any of us had access to previously. And I think especially for people of that generation who were adopted, like you said, everything was closed and a lot has changed since then in the adoption world. But obviously that would be a huge mystery, you'd always want to know and wonder about that. Now I think it's interesting because you did express in your book that when you were younger, you kind of said, I'm not really that interested in learning about my biological roots. And what led you to make you want to really dig into it when you were older? Like, obviously, the DNA test kind of spurred it, but was there a change in the way you thought about things that you thought, now's the time I want to know?
not really.
Okay.
I I know it would be wonderful if that was the way easy as it was, but I did the test for her. Um, but it wasn't really that I wanted to know. It's a little complicated, as all stories are. I actually had found some of my biological relatives in my mid 40s through a long, weird process, kind of accidentally, believe it or not. And I met them, and everything went pretty well. And I came out of it with relationships with some nieces that are lovely. Um, but they told me who they thought my biological father was, and I didn't doubt it. So I really didn't have, I got in touch with his sister and she said, well, I'm really glad to be your friend, but I'm not your aunt. And she's not that much older than me. Um, and so I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So when the
Uh-huh.
DNA test came in and it did have a whole different biological family, I'm like, oh, I Honestly, as you read in the book, I wasn't sure I was going to meet them. I
Hmm.
didn't know what to do. And I didn't want to complicate life any more than it can be complicated. My daughter was getting married, we were moving, and all of this kind of stuff was coming up. But it was after I did decide to meet them, and they told me some, pretty shocking. They told me where I had been the first 20 months of my life, and it wasn't where I thought I had been. I had been with them, that I
Yeah.
felt like I needed to dig into that. I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it was my nature. I guess I needed to find out what had happened if I could.
Completely makes sense. I think the curiosity part of it, for sure. You're like, I need to figure this out. What happened here? Um,
Right.
yeah, and I know it's interesting because I think every adopted person has a different experience with that. Some people want to know from an early age and they're really curious about their biological family and they want to look into it more, and other people don't. It's just they feel very content with where they are, or maybe, like you said, there's a part of them that just doesn't want to kick up the dust in a way and kind of complicate things. So I think it's a really interesting perspective that you could have maybe done that earlier on, but you decided not to, and then it just kind of happened. Um, so I know you mentioned that digging into your past, you always felt like might upset your adoptive parents, your parents. Um, do you think, how did you feel when you actually decided, even though they had passed away at this point, was there a part of you that felt any guilt looking into it even then?
Absolutely. And when I found that first side, my biological mother's side in my 40s, my parents were still alive. And
Okay.
it took me probably a year, yeah, about a year almost from the time someone told me who they were until I reached out to them.
Hmm.
And that was because I was struggling. I got guidance from different people and finally decided I wouldn't feel comfortable reaching out to them unless I had talked to my parents. And they were completely understanding. And I probably, all the feelings and emotions I put on those early years that I would have hurt them, I probably over exaggerated that. I
Yeah.
think my parents were really practical people. They realized that I might have questions. In fact, a cousin has told me since that her mother was my mother's sister, and that her mother had asked my mother, "Does Patty ever have questions?" And my mother had said, "I've tried a couple of times to talk to her, and she shuts it out." So
Wow.
I think that she might have been more willing to give me information than I thought.
Hmm.
But definitely early on I did. And then after they'd passed away, I knew that they had kind of given tacit approval. They had met some of my biological siblings.
Hmm.
Um, and I knew that they wouldn't, I think they would have been okay with it just from their reaction to knowing the first family. And the guilt, though, really stepped up and ramped up again after I got the records and I saw what was in them, which is the basis of the book. And oh boy, did I feel guilty then for quite a while and upset.
Yeah, oh yeah, and I think there's that protective feeling that you could have with your adoptive parents. You know, you're like they did this good thing. They gave me a great childhood. They gave me this life, but then it's holding those mixed feelings, you know? How can you have maybe things, I think every person goes through this with their parents. When you grow up, you want to believe your parents are perfect and that they're good and they're always good. And it's like, but they're humans and we all have these flaws and things that we don't always do right and things we mess up doing. And it can be hard as a kid, I think, to grapple with that. And I think especially for you, finding some of those things out so much later in the records could be really difficult. So that's very interesting. I know one of the things that you discovered in this whole process was that you had Mexican heritage, and that was probably just like really, you'd grown up your whole life with this kind of identity that you thought you were, and now you find out you have this whole other heritage. How did that feel to discover that?
I I would say I was surprised, except I would have been surprised by anything. The first picture of me ever, I was, 20 months old, standing in my parents' front lawn, and my mother had cut off my hair and dyed it and given me a henna rinse, which is a red rinse. And she told me, my mother was a beautician, and she told me, um, that my hair was in such bad shape from foster care and that I hadn't been cared for properly that she's like, cut it all off and gave you perm and some body. I'm like, okay,
Okay,
that's
yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was and my mother was very eccentric as you got through the book. So I thought that's just mom. She
Yeah.
wanted me to be cute or whatever. And I'm not saying that that haircut was cute. It was not. But so I thought, that's just mom. And it wasn't until 2016 or so, I was talking to the lady who was doing eyelash extensions for my daughter's engagement party. And she said, I was telling her the story. I thought she'll think this is a hoot, 20
Yeah.
months old. And she said, uh, oh, you were in disguise.
Yeah.
And I had never thought of it. It sounds really dim, but I had never realized. I'm like, oh,
Well, yeah.
they were trying. And in my county, I would definitely, there were very few members of a minority group. And I think that would have been a more identifying factor and mom and dad had already lost us an adoption. It was in progress and the mother had come to their front lawn and, was ranting and raving and probably under the influence. And so the court took the little boy away and my parents had so hoped to adopt them. My own biological mother uh, probably could have been a problem.
Right.
So I think maybe they'd already experienced that once, and maybe that's where the henna and the perm came in. But I think whatever, I mean, I'm also half French, and that surprised me. Anything would
Yeah.
have surprised me. What
Right.
did surprise me within, I reached out to my cousin Terry through Ancestry right away. And
Mhm.
she got back to me within a day and said, oh, Patty, I'm sitting here with tears streaming down my eyes. Your father was a man named Ray Lopez, my uncle, and he asked me to find you before he died. And
Oh.
it was too late. He had died in 2012, and this was 2017 or so by then,
Hmm.
2018. But so that within a few weeks they had invited me to a quinceañera and I got to meet all kinds of families. So the whole thing about finding out my heritage was interspersed with meeting this great family. And I don't
Yeah.
really remember, it sounds a little strange, but so many people were like, huh, when they look at me and I'm like, oh my goodness, I have so many first cousins who are blonde.
Yeah.
I think we perception about how people might look. But yeah, I love them. They certainly have been an integral part of my life in the last few years. I just had a launch party, a thank you party, and I invited all of my families and
Oh.
people from my and one of the most touch I actually had 3 parties in a week, but that was in my hometown, and I was able to have my only remaining aunt and her husband and a lot of my cousins, and then I had the cousins I grew up with there from both sides of the family. And I will tell you, I've never been so touched as when all of my cousins I knew initially applauded my new family,
Oh.
the family I found, and
Yeah.
basically saying, I don't know, thanks for sharing her with us, and it was
Oh.
it was very touching and moving.
I think
So
that's such a great thing to have because I know so many people who are adopted struggle with that torn loyalty between bio family and adoptive family, and you feel like, well, if I love my biological family too much, am I dishonoring my adoptive family, or vice versa? If I love my adoptive family, am I dishonoring my biological family? And it's like, what a beautiful picture and experience for you to have that, where you can see them all together in one space. Like that's just so. But I feel like that's such a rare thing to be able to experience, and that must have been such a gift for you to have that.
it was, and it's all on them. And I will say that when I first met my Lopez family, I invited just a couple. I couldn't invite everybody, but a couple of cousins from each of my mother's side of the family, my father's side, and then as many Lopez's as we could gather. And they and my daughter, and we all visited, and they all got along so famously. I mean, the question on the Lopez family was whatever happened to baby Marianne, which was me.
Hmm.
And my cousins who'd watched me grow up and probably struggle with different things is like, oh, this is where she came from.
Yeah.
And yeah, that moment in that room, standing and seeing them applaud the Lopez's, I was a little verklempt. That was just something else. And everyone looked joyous. So I
Oh,
know I'm one of the very lucky ones. And I try to remember when I'm telling my story, I know not everyone's story is like that.
right, right. Oh, for sure. And and I think every adoptee has their own unique perspective on that, and whether they had a positive experience in their adoptive family or not. There are people who haven't had that, but I think it's great to hear all of those perspectives for sure. Um, so so I'm just curious, like, do you feel like you've tried to get in touch with the Mexican heritage that you have, or is it mostly just through like spending time with that family? Has that been a journey you've been on at all?
I would say I haven't done a very good job. I don't speak Spanish. I don't,
Right.
but I did, my aunt gave me, a lot of my aunts and cousins get together at the holidays and make tamales, and I've asked them if they would teach me how. And because my biological father's family, were illegal immigrants, and they did live in segregated housing. My father, when he was little, they lived in, it was called the Colony, and they had four families to a building, no indoor plumbing. And
Wow.
he was in the 1930s, I guess the late 1930s. He was very young when he had me. Um, but I listened to their stories, and my cousin brought me back Mexican bingo. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's like
Oh
a
no, I
bingo game,
haven't.
and it's a lot of fun.
That's fun.
And I pretty much just try to, I don't want to, I feel kind of like, to press it too hard would almost be like cultural appropriation. I mean,
Yeah,
it
because
feels
you
like,
didn't grow up in it. Yeah.
yeah. And so I respect it and I honor it, and I love hearing the stories. But I will tell you, I've done more in that way than I have about learning French or anything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's understandable. If you're actually like spending time with people who speak Spanish and
Yes,
know that culture, that's totally different. Um,
exactly.
so what do you think, in this journey was the most difficult part about discovering your history?
It wasn't, I don't know that there was anything difficult. Well, I don't want to give too much of the book away, but
I know
yeah,
too.
you know what I'm talking about. The hardest moments happened to me when I met my Lopez family. I met a little aunt, Aunt Eva, and she, was hugging me and kissing me. And I already knew I had two birthdays. My mother, when I was 15, acknowledged that she had changed my birthday by 5 days, and it was the same thing as the haircut, right? She was trying to hide me, keep me from she said, the nosy old biddies in town. And um, so I had that already, but my Aunt Eva brought yet a third birth certificate. So that was a little difficult, and that's where the girl with three birthdays came in, and that's the day I was born. But I've been celebrating a different day all these years, and after I did change my birthday from November 20th that I had been told when I was little to November 15th, when I found out that was what was on my birth certificate from that my parents had. And I don't know how that happened. It's one mystery I never solved.
Yeah,
But my mom asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I want the truth. Didn't know it
right.
wasn't the truth, but yet
You were
again,
going to be a
um,
journalist then, you wanted the truth.
I did. I wanted the truth. I'm everything. I was Woodward and Birdstein all the way. It was right in my era, and I'm like, no, I want my to celebrate what's true and good.
Right.
Well, so November 15th has always been my birthday, and it's only been the last few years that I found out I was born on October 19th. So I'm a month older, 6 weeks older than I thought I was. Um, but I kept, I still celebrate just that November 15th. That's the day I decided. So I
Mhm.
feel like I kind of had some say, I want to celebrate
Oh,
it this
yeah.
day. Also, at this age, it would have been murder to go through and try to get every document. At 15, I had
Yeah.
no documents. Back then, they didn't give you a social security number when you were born. You got it when you got your first job. So I didn't have anything that I had to change, but now it would have been crazy. So
Yeah,
the
that would be
first year
very complicated.
the first year I knew, I thought, what am I going to feel on October 19th? And I didn't feel anything except that my Aunt Eva would always call me for the 5 years I had her. And then she passed away on my October 19th birthday and sing me happy birthday. So I
Oh,
had that little celebration of my first thing, but that's not what you asked me. You asked me um,
what was
about the
yeah, the
difficult
difficult part of discovering.
when Aunt Eva gave me my birth certificate. She told me that I had been living with their family. She was Ray's youngest sister, and his older sister had her in her home because their mother was dying or dead.
Mhm.
And she also wanted to adopt me,
Mhm.
had Ray's consent for that. I don't know about my biological mother. Her rights had been terminated. So, um, and she said, honey, you were living with us, which is, completely different story than what I had heard. And she said, and then one day, Jane, the sister who wanted to adopt me, came into the room with you, and she had you in a beautiful dress and your bow in your hair. And Eva said, I said, where are you taking Mary? Where are you taking our baby? And she said, we're going today to take Mary to see the judge. But when she comes home tonight, she'll be ours forever and ever. And
Mhm.
then my Aunt Eva said, and then we never saw you again. So
So heartbreaking for
that,
them, that's, oh,
well, my Aunt Jane had a nervous breakdown.
yeah.
Um, so that, her pain combined with, hey, what the heck happened in that courtroom led me to have my records unlocked. And when I did, there was a one page, well, no, not one page, a one afternoon visit was several pages long, from a court worker. And it was called the report of investigation. I'd been living with my parents for a year, and it was time for them to move forward. Now, my parents had waited for, they got married in 1946, realized they couldn't have children, began trying to adopt shortly thereafter. And this was 1962 when the court was, and I had already been with them a year. And so they had wanted to be parents for a long time. And the narrative I always grew up with was, you were the answer to our dreams. We had wanted a child for so long. And in that report of investigation, which I just got in 2020, just as COVID was hitting, it ends in my mailbox. It said, basically, there was a paragraph that said, the Eddingtons are not sure that Mary and Patty is the right child for them.
Yeah.
And
That,
that threw me down. And that was the most difficult thing. Actually, I struggled with that for a long time, and I would not have written the book based on if I had believed that was true. It didn't make sense to me. What
yeah.
they said about why didn't make any sense to me.
Mhm.
And it took me a little while, and then all of a sudden I had kind of a eureka moment, and I called a cousin, and she said, let me look into that for you. And she
Mhm.
found a little scrap of paper, just this big. And that scrap of paper indicated to me, oh,
Mhm.
that's what really happened. So, but
Happened.
those weeks in between, I don't know how long it was. It was right when COVID hit. It was a few weeks that I believed what the court document said, that they almost didn't adopt me, which
Yeah.
was the furthest thing from the truth. They were lying to the court.
Yeah. Well, and that can just make you question everything, like question your whole childhood. Like, were they just doing this when they didn't really want
Why?
to, or what was wrong with me? Or, I can only imagine. And then just the compounded issue of the fact that they were deceased, you can't go ask them, you can't talk to them about it or get to the bottom of it. So, yeah, I can only imagine the emotions that took
Well,
you.
then the guilt did kick in. I thought mom and dad did everything they could to hide that from me, what they said to the court worker. And after the scrap of paper was, detected, I realized they probably never thought anyone but that one court worker would see what they said. It's the only way the people I knew would have been able to say that. They were good people in all ways, and that's what was so shocking to me. And I thought, and then I thought, am I, here I'm digging into their, private thoughts. And then I thought, well, I already talked about their visits to the basement to shampoo dad's hair. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was pretty fun.
my father was bald and I was the
Bald.
little boy to that Mighty Mouse. He got up so early they had no time to themselves. And so I thought, if you're talking about that, you can probably talk about
Yeah,
this.
you can probably say that too. Yeah.
They're
So
probably madder at me about that, actually.
yeah, probably. They're like, hey.
Hey,
Oh man. So when did you first consider sharing your story as a memoir and what led you to that decision?
well, when I found out I had three birthdays, I thought then, hey, this is a story. I'm a journalist. I spent my entire career telling other people's stories. I'd also come to a point in my career where I had given up. Newspapers gave up on us, most of us, a long time ago. I was working for magazines, and I teach jazzercise. I had that going. I worked for my husband's clinic doing a social media. But my daughter was, completely grown out of the house and considering starting her own family. And I'm stubborn. I didn't want to not do anything. I'm not ready even yet to not do anything. So I think, hey, this might be an interesting story. I went to some writing workshops and told, the first story, about, my finding my first birthday. I didn't even know the second part at that point, and it got such good response
Mhm.
that, and I thought, oh, people like this kind of story. And it was a lot of the writing I did at those workshops was about my mother. She was quite a character
Yeah.
and got a lot of laughs out of Millie's stories. And the thing is, I know she wouldn't mind. She knew what she was doing all those times when she was, she grabbed her chicken around the neck and threw it in the outhouse to settle down. And
Oh
she
my God.
she told the policeman she couldn't be speeding on the way to because she was on her way to church. And her favorite word, and you could ask her at any time in her life, what's your favorite word, Mom? Phooey. So
Really?
phooey.
I love that.
She would call legislators and tell them she had an issue with them. And one man said, well, Mrs. Eddington, I can't speak with you. I'm on the House floor right now. She said, I've been to the House. I know what you're doing. You've got your feet up on your desk and you're reading the funnies. So you can talk to me. So she was a character. And the stories about her were really well received, which, as you read, was important to me because she could also be a little difficult. And
Maybe
so
rough around the edges or something. Yeah.
she was just a woman before her time and she didn't take
Yeah.
anybody's crap. And she wanted things done the way they should be done. And so I don't think she ever went through a grocery line without making the bag person repack everything. And so um, getting her understanding of my mother's character was important to me. So when those stories went over well, I thought, hey, maybe this could be more.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, so
even the
that's kind
title
of
is
it,
just so intriguing. The girl with the three birthdays, you're like, how? It's
right?
it really gets you thinking. I love the title of it. Definitely drew me in for sure.
I will confess that is not my doing. It was called The Greatest Centennial Hula Hoop Queen, two names, three birthdays, and one big secret. And I liked that one too. And my publisher did as well. Because as you know, there's a subplot about me always trying to get a crown on my head in some way. And but she said, but it doesn't say memoir.
Mm,
And there was a couple other things. So my publisher, she writes press, Brick Warner, the actual publisher, took the time to read my book, and I know she can't do that with everyone's. And she she came up with, I think, seven different titles and maybe five different titles and seven different subtitles. And she said, play with these. And so I
yeah.
did them with Jim, my husband, my daughter Molly, and my best friend Kristen, and we all came up with that combination. Everyone put it down, and when we came back, that's what we had. So they are
Yeah.
very good at titles and covers over at She Writes Press.
That's awesome. A lot of the people who watch my channel are prospective adoptive parents. Like they want to adopt, they're interested in it, and they want to learn a lot about it before they jump in. And so one thing I always like to ask guests who are adoptees is, what are some things that your parents did well, and what are some things you wish your parents had done differently? Because that's the perspective as adoptive parents who haven't been adopted ourselves. Like we need to understand that. And so my first question then for you is just like, what are some things your adoptive parents did that helped you feel safe, secure, wanted, loved? What are some examples that come to mind for you?
I think foremost, they loved each other and they weren't afraid to show when they were upset with each other.
Hmm.
Um, but I knew that they loved each other. So that made me feel very safe.
Hmm.
As a child, they told me, and as it turned out, it was true. There came that moment when I wasn't sure, but that I was the answer to their dream. And they and my families, my dad's family and my mother's family, both large families, always made me feel just no different. Make sure I was going to say make sure that your relatives are on board, but you don't have to do that. This is not their decision, it's your decision. Um, if you want to adopt, um, even with as much protection as you put around the child, someone at some point will say something,
Yep.
and just prepare them for that, I think. I told a story in the book that I was at a hometown festival and a man, I was playing a game and a man, the Lions Club, my father was very active and said to me, oh, I was grown up. I was 22. You're that girl. You're that girl that lives out there with the Eddingtons.
Oh,
And I'm like, I'm their daughter,
I am an Eddington. Yeah.
right? And that was one thing that happened in my life that made me realize not everyone views adoption like we do. Not
Yeah.
everyone views it as a, wonderful thing. And, or just some people don't understand it. I hope by this time, I know you're so much younger than me. I hope you didn't have anything like that.
Um, no, we've definitely had people ask us, are you going to have any of your own kids? Like that statement can rub me the wrong way for sure. I'm like, well, they are my kids. You know what I mean? Like it's almost for us, adoption was plan A. So it wasn't like a result of infertility or anything like that. We don't know if that would be an issue or not, but it was something we wanted to do. And so when people say that, I'm just like, what if this isn't just like a plan B type of thing? Like this is what we want. These kids aren't just like playing second fiddle to the kid we could have had or something, And so that definitely rubs me the wrong way. And people don't necessarily mean it in a bad way, but it's one of those things where they're not thinking. They're not thinking about how like we view these kids as our kids. So we don't view them as secondary to if we had biological children or something. So that can be hard for people to understand. I think especially because adoption was plan A for us, people don't get that. People often will view adoption as like if you can't have biological children, then you resort to that in a way. And that we've definitely run into some things with that. People are like, "Are you sure you're not going to have kids?" We're like, "We have three of them. We're good." Like,
Three's good.
yeah, three. I'm
On the
like, that's plenty for me. So
on the other side, and I'm assuming your children are pretty young, they might get at some point, do you ever, or maybe they do have an open adoption, but do you ever want to know who your real parents are? And I would always arch my eyebrow and say, yeah, I do know them. Jim and Millie Eddington,
yeah, the
corporate,
real parents
my real
thing.
parents. That's my real parents. And
Mhm.
I always try to give a little grace because I'm sure there's something I'm not involved with and I don't quite understand and I might say the wrong things sometimes, but I do try to educate too politely.
Yes, exactly. I just go like, we are real. I'm like, am I fake? Yeah.
But no, I think that they did a wonderful job in all ways, just by showing love to each other. They didn't coddle me. I was an only child. I remember the other thing I got because I was an only child was spoiled only child, and we had a nice home and we had a farm and we had a cottage and I had ponies and so someone recently said that my daughter's an only child as well, and someone said someone said spoiled only child. No, no offense. I'm like, I do take offense to that. I said
Yeah.
spoiled means rotten.
Hmm.
It's no good. Throw it out. And I said, she is an only child for sure, and she's had lots of great life experiences, but I've never met anyone who is um more kind and compassionate and willing to do for others. And she's certainly not. She might be in their idea spoiled by she gets all of our attention.
Tension. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not spoiled. It's
Mhm.
a different, it should be a different word. So yeah, they were, I was definitely not in that term. I mean, all of my friends had more stuff than I did. We had a lot of experiences and the beauty of where I grew up and so forth. But like my snowmobile was third hand and it wasn't like we were wealthy, but we had a lot of love and we had a nice home and it was clean and it was safe. I
That's
grew up in a beautiful road, but it's only been in the last years I've realized that there was a lot of not safe things happening in the homes around me, and that made me sad. I just recently realized that someone on the road I grew up in wrote a different kind of book about her home life, and
okay.
I thought at that point my parents must have known some of this. They
Hmm.
must have had an idea, and I never knew.
Yeah. You were kind of in that safe bubble, it
Yeah.
sounds like, which is so important. We want our kids to feel that way. Um, so is there any sort of advice that you would give to adoptive parents whose children kind of express interest in looking into their history, looking into their bio family? What would you tell adoptive parents in that situation?
Yeah, someone came to me many years ago now, and they were adopting two children, and they knew I was adopted, and they asked the same thing: "What would you is there one thing your parents that you wish they would have done differently?
Mhm.
And yeah, as wonderful as they were, and I think that my cousin was right, my mom probably would have given me more information. I probably needed to hear, honey, being curious is absolutely normal. You
Mhm.
know, it's normal. It's your right to know what we can tell you. It won't hurt us.
Mhm.
Um, and it won't change how we feel. We know it won't change how you feel about us, and it won't change how we feel about you.
Yeah.
I
That
think that would have,
directness is needed for kids, I think, you know.
yes, I think, and I do think mom probably tried a couple times. It's in the book. She had come to me at one point and tried to give me some information. It was Millie, so things were always a little bit off. It wasn't the right, it
Yeah.
wasn't the right information, but, and I said, no, I don't want to know. And
Mhm.
I think she took that but more it was, mom, what I was really saying, I don't want to hurt you. I
Yeah.
don't want you to think I want to know, because that would make me think maybe you would think I didn't love you as much or something.
Right.
And so I think that would be the only thing, if they could have just ask at every different stage in life, don't just ask once. Do you have any questions? How can I help you with that? And it's normal. It's normal to be curious. And I know that you don't mean that you don't love me.
Completely agree with that. I mean, I know that's something. So my oldest child is actually almost 14. So she does know quite a bit about her own history, but there are things even where I say, do you want me to look into that? Because I would want to know as well. And, my own personal backstory is I was adopted by my stepdad. So I don't really know much about my biological father's side. I know a little bit. So I kind of grew up with that same curiosity and wondering. And I think that's really helped me in adoptive parenting because I know what it felt like to want to know and to have that same kind of feeling of like, will I be upsetting my family in some way by asking this, or will I make them feel like they're not good enough? So totally understood that growing up in a different degree. But yeah, I can definitely relate to that experience of being like, I would like someone to say, it's okay if you want to know about this. So
Yeah.
definitely sharing that with our
And
children.
like at different points in their life, because they may not say yes at 7 or 10, but they may at 15.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. Well, Patty, I really appreciate your time. This has been a wonderful book. I want everyone to go pick this up. I will put a link in the description below, but definitely check it out. It's worth the read. I think if you are a prospective adoptive parent, you will definitely enjoy getting this perspective of someone who was adopted and went through this process and learning about themselves. So, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story and being brave to share the difficult parts and the great parts of it. We really appreciate it.
I'm very grateful to you for having me on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Patty. If you did, go ahead and click that like button and also go buy a copy of her book. Believe me, totally worth the read. You can click the link in the description box below and it will take you straight to the Amazon listing. And with that, I will see you next week.